Gravity is the most familiar force in the universe and the least understood. You have lived with it every moment of your life. It held you in your crib. It pulled you to the ground the first time you tried to walk. It keeps the coffee in your cup, the air in the atmosphere, the moon in its orbit, and the earth on its path around the Sunday. You have never experienced a single second without it. And yet, after 4 centuries of scientific investigation, after Newton and Einstein and Hawking and 100 Nobel laureates, no one can tell you what gravity is. We can describe what it does with extraordinary precision. We can predict its effects to 14 decimal places. We can detect its waves from collisions between black holes 1 billion light-years away. But we cannot say what it is. We cannot explain why it exists. And the deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. The strangeness begins with an observation so obvious that it took a genius to notice it was remarkable. Everything falls at the same rate. A feather and a hammer, dropped in a vacuum, hit the ground at exactly the same time. This was demonstrated famously by Apollo 15 astronaut David Scott on the surface of the Moon in 1971. And it has been confirmed to extraordinary precision by laboratory experiments on Earth. A ball of lead and a ball of aluminum, a grain of sand and a battleship, an atom and a galaxy, all of them respond to gravity identically. The gravitational acceleration does not depend on the mass of the falling object, its composition, its temperature, its color, its history, or any other property. Gravity treats everything the same. No other force does this. Electromagnetism depends on charge. The strong nuclear force depends on color charge. The weak nuclear force depends on flavor. Each of these forces distinguishes between particles based on their properties, pulling some, pushing others, and ignoring the rest. But gravity does not distinguish. Gravity pulls everything. It pulls equally, universally, without exception, and without preference. This universality is so unusual, so unlike any other force in physics, that it demands an explanation. And the explanation that Einstein provided in 1915 is one of the most beautiful and most revolutionary ideas in the history of human thought. Einstein's explanation was this: gravity is not a force, it is geometry. In Newton's framework, gravity is a force that acts between masses across empty space. The sun pulls the earth pulls the moon, the apple pulls the ground. The force acts instantaneously across any distance through a mechanism that Newton himself could not explain. When pressed to describe how one object could exert a force on another without touching it, Newton famously replied, "Hypotheses non fingo." I frame no hypotheses. He could calculate the force with perfect accuracy. He could not explain what it was or how it worked. The mechanism remained a mystery. Newton's gravity was spectacularly successful as a calculational tool. It predicted the orbits of the planets, the trajectories of comets, the tides of the oceans, and the paths of cannonballs with a precision that seemed almost miraculous. But it had a flaw that Newton himself acknowledged, and that troubled him for the rest of his life. It described an action at a distance. The sun pulls the Earth through 150 million kilometers of apparently empty space instantaneously, without any intervening medium, without any mechanism of transmission. How? Newton had no answer. In a letter to Richard Bentley, he wrote, "That gravity should be innate, inherent, and essential to matter, so that one body may act upon another at a distance through a vacuum, without the mediation of anything else, by and through which their action and force may be conveyed from one to another, is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has, in philosophical matters, a competent faculty of thinking can ever fall into it." Newton considered his own theory's central mechanism, action at a distance, to be absurd. He used it because it worked. He never believed it was the final truth. 200 years later, Einstein found the final truth, or at least a deeper truth, and it was not a force at all. Einstein dissolved the mystery by dissolving the force. In general relativity, there is no gravitational force. There is only the curvature of space-time. Mass and energy curve the fabric of space-time around them, and objects moving through this curved space-time follow the straightest possible paths called geodesics. The Earth does not orbit the Sun because the Sun is pulling it with an invisible force. The Earth orbits the Sun because the Sun's mass has curved the space-time around it, and the Earth is following the straightest possible path through that curved geometry. The Earth is not being pulled. It is falling freely through curved space-time, following the geometry of the universe, responding not to a force but to the shape of reality itself. John Archibald Wheeler, whose work has been the foundation of this entire series, captured this in what may be the most elegant summary in the history of physics. Space-time tells matter how to move. Matter tells space-time how to curve. The relationship is mutual, dynamic, and continuous. Mass shapes geometry. Geometry guides mass. And the dance between them produces everything you experience as gravity. The fall of the apple, the orbit of the moon, the spiral of the galaxy, the expansion of the universe. This reframing of gravity from force to geometry is not merely a change of description. It is a change of ontology, a change in what gravity is. In Newton's framework, gravity is a thing, a force, an entity, a something that reaches across space and pulls objects toward each other. In Einstein's framework, gravity is a shape, a curvature, a geometry, a property of the space-time in which objects exist. The force disappears. What remains is the curvature. And the curvature is not something added to space-time from outside. It is space-time. It is the way space-time is shaped by the presence of mass and energy. The experimental confirmations of general relativity are among the most spectacular achievements in the history of science. The first confirmation came in 1919, when Arthur Eddington measured the bending of starlight around the Sun during a solar eclipse, finding exactly the amount of bending that Einstein's equations predicted, twice the amount predicted by Newton. The result made Einstein a global celebrity overnight and established general relativity as the correct description of gravity. The 1919 eclipse expedition was one of the first great public demonstrations of scientific truth. Newspapers around the world carried the headline. Einstein became a household name, and the idea that space itself could be curved, that the geometry of the universe was not the flat, Euclidean geometry of common sense, but a dynamic, malleable fabric shaped by the presence of mass, entered public consciousness for the first time. The philosophical implications were staggering. Space was not a fixed stage on which events occurred. Space was part of the story. It participated. It responded. It changed shape in the presence of mass, and its changing shape was what we experienced as gravity. The century that followed produced confirmation after confirmation, each one more precise than the last. The Pound-Rebka experiment in 1959 measured gravitational time dilation in a tower at Harvard University, confirming that a clock at the top of the tower runs faster than a clock at the bottom by exactly the amount that general relativity predicts. The Shapiro delay, discovered in 1964, demonstrated that radar signals traveling near the Sun are delayed by the curvature of space-time, arriving microseconds later than they would in flat space. And the Hulse-Taylor binary pulsar, discovered in 1974, provided the first indirect evidence for gravitational waves. The orbit of the binary pulsar was shrinking at exactly the rate predicted by general relativity for a system losing energy through gravitational wave emission. Hulse and Taylor received the Nobel Prize in 1993 for this discovery. Gravitational time dilation. The prediction that time runs slower in stronger gravitational fields has been confirmed with extraordinary precision. The GPS satellites that guide your phone must correct for gravitational time dilation. The clocks on the satellites, orbiting far from Earth's gravitational field, run faster than clocks on the ground by approximately 45 microseconds per day. Without the correction mandated by general relativity, GPS would drift by about 10 kilometers per day. Every time you use GPS, you are relying on the accuracy of Einstein's description of gravity as the curvature of space-time. Gravitational lensing, the bending of light from distant galaxies by the gravitational field of intervening mass, has been observed in thousands of cases by the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Space Telescope. The lensing produces arcs, rings, and multiple images of distant galaxies, each one a confirmation that light follows the curved geometry of space-time exactly as Einstein predicted. And in 2015, the LIGO Observatory detected gravitational waves, ripples in the fabric of space-time itself, produced by the collision of two black holes 1.3 billion light-years away. The waves were exactly the shape, the frequency, and the amplitude that general relativity predicted. Space-time is not a rigid, unchanging background. It is a dynamic, flexible medium that ripples, waves, and vibrates in response to the violent events that occur within it. Gravity is not a force traveling through space. Gravity is space, trembling. The LIGO detection was not merely a confirmation of a prediction. It was the opening of a new window on the universe. For the first time, humanity could perceive the universe not through light, but through the vibrations of space-time itself. The gravitational wave signal from the black hole merger carried information about the masses, spins, and orbital dynamics of the two black holes with a precision that no optical telescope could match. And it demonstrated, with visceral immediacy, that space-time is not an abstraction. It is a physical medium that trembles, oscillates, and carries energy across the cosmos. The fabric of reality is not a metaphor, it is a fabric. The Gravity Probe B satellite, launched by NASA in 2004, confirmed another prediction of general relativity, frame dragging, the phenomenon in which a rotating mass drags the space-time around it, twisting the geometry in the direction of the rotation. The Earth's rotation drags space-time by a tiny but measurable amount, and Gravity Probe B detected this dragging with extraordinary precision using 4 of the most perfect gyroscopes ever constructed. The space-time around the Earth is not merely curved by the Earth's mass, it is twisted by the Earth's rotation. The geometry of reality is shaped not only by where mass is, but by how it moves. Every one of these confirmations reinforces the same radical message. Gravity is not a force acting within a fixed space. Gravity is the shape of space itself, responding dynamically to the presence and motion of mass and energy. The universe is not a container holding objects. The universe is a geometry that objects shape and that shapes them in return. And this geometry, this mutual, dynamic, continuous shaping, is what you experience every moment of your life as gravity. The equivalence principle, which Einstein identified as the key insight that led him to general relativity, reveals something profound about the nature of gravitational experience. The equivalence principle states that the experience of gravity and the experience of acceleration are locally indistinguishable. If you are in a closed elevator and you feel your feet pressing against the floor, you cannot determine from the sensation alone whether the elevator is sitting on the surface of the Earth in a gravitational field or accelerating upward through empty space at 9.8 meters per second squared. The two experiences are identical, and the converse is equally true. If you are in free fall, falling freely in a gravitational field, like an astronaut in orbit, you feel no gravity at all. You are weightless. The gravitational force has vanished. This is deeply strange. In every other branch of physics, forces produce sensations. Electromagnetism produces the feeling of being pushed or pulled by a magnet. The strong force produces the violent energy release of a nuclear reaction. But gravity, the most familiar force of all, produces no sensation when you are freely responding to it. The only time you feel gravity is when something prevents you from freely following the curved geometry, when the floor pushes up against your feet, when the chair presses against your back, when the ground stops your fall. What you feel as gravity is not gravity. It is the resistance to gravity. Gravity itself is unfelt, invisible, and in the experience of free fall, indistinguishable from the absence of gravity. Einstein himself described the moment he realized the significance of the equivalence principle as the happiest thought of my life. He was sitting in a chair at the patent office in Bern when the thought occurred to him. A person falling from a roof does not feel their own weight. In that moment of freefall, gravity has vanished. And if gravity can vanish through a change of reference frame, if it is present for the observer standing on the ground and absent for the observer in freefall, then gravity is not a property of objects or of space. It is a property of the observer's relationship to the geometry. It is relative, and anything that is relative can be transformed away. And anything that can be transformed away cannot be fundamental in the same sense that charge or mass is fundamental. Gravity is not a thing in the world. It is a feature of how the world is shaped. This insight that gravity is geometry, not force, took Einstein 8 years to develop into the full mathematical framework of general relativity. He needed the mathematics of Riemannian geometry, the tensor calculus of Ricci and Levi-Civita, and the help of his friend Marcel Grossmann to formulate the field equations. The result was published in November 1915, and it was immediately recognized as one of the supreme achievements of the human intellect. The equations were beautiful. They were simple, deceptively simple, hiding within their compact notation a universe of complexity. And they worked. They predicted everything that Newton's gravity predicted, plus new phenomena that Newton's framework could not accommodate. The precession of Mercury's orbit, the bending of starlight, the gravitational redshift, and the existence of gravitational waves. This is what it means for gravity to be geometry rather than force. A force is something you feel. A force pushes, pulls, and produces a measurable effect on the object it acts upon. But the curvature of spacetime does not push or pull. It shapes. It guides. It provides the geometry within which everything moves. And the experience of moving through curved geometry is the experience of moving through nothing at all. The experience of free fall, of weightlessness, of effortless motion along the path that the geometry provides. Now here is where the investigation takes its decisive turn. Because the properties of gravity that we have just described, its universality, its geometric nature, its unfelt operation, and its function as the mechanism by which things that are separated are drawn together, are not unique to gravity. They are shared by another phenomenon that has been at the center of human inquiry for as long as human beings have been capable of reflection. That phenomenon is love. Before you dismiss this comparison, consider the history of physics. Every major breakthrough in physics has come from recognizing that two phenomena that seemed entirely different were actually manifestations of the same underlying principle. Newton unified the fall of the apple and the orbit of the moon, two phenomena that seemed to have nothing in common under a single law of gravitation. Maxwell unified electricity and magnetism into electromagnetism. Einstein unified space and time into space-time, and mass and energy into mass energy. Weinberg, Salam, and Glashow unified electromagnetism and the weak nuclear force into the electroweak force. Each unification seemed implausible before it was demonstrated, and obvious afterward. The history of physics is the history of discovering that things that seem different are actually the same. The proposal that gravity and love might be manifestations of the same underlying principle belongs to this tradition of unification. It is not proven. It may never be proven in the strict sense that the electroweak unification was proven, but the structural parallels are precise enough, and the convergence with the contemplative traditions is consistent enough that the possibility deserves serious examination rather than reflexive dismissal. This is not a casual metaphor. It is not a poetic flourish designed to make physics seem warm and humanistic. It is an observation about structural parallels between two phenomena that are usually considered to belong to entirely different categories of reality. Gravity belongs to physics. Love belongs to psychology, to philosophy, to theology. They have nothing to do with each other, according to the conventional understanding. But the conventional understanding may be wrong, because the structural parallels between gravity and love are too precise, too numerous, and too deep to be accidental. Consider the parallels one by one. Gravity is universal. It acts on everything, without exception and without preference. Love, in its highest form, the form that the contemplative traditions call agape, metta, karuna, or rahma, is also universal. It is directed toward all beings, without exception and without preference. The Buddhist metta is boundless love toward all beings. The Christian agape is love for friend and enemy alike. The Sufi rahma is the mercy that encompasses all of creation. In both cases, the defining characteristic is universality, the refusal to discriminate, the refusal to exclude, the embrace of everything that exists. Gravity is not a force. It is geometry, the shape of the space-time in which everything exists. Love, in the deepest understanding of the contemplative traditions, is also not an emotion. It is the structure of reality itself. God is love. The first epistle of John declares, not God has love, or God commands love, but God is love. Love is the nature of the ground of being. It is the shape of reality, the geometry of consciousness, the curvature of the space in which all conscious beings exist. It is not something added to reality from outside. It is reality experienced from the inside. Gravity is unfelt in free fall. You only feel gravity when you resist it. Love, in the contemplative traditions, is unfelt in the natural state. You only feel the absence of love when you resist it, when the ego constructs barriers, when fear builds walls, when craving and aversion create the distortions that block the natural flow of compassion. The Buddhist tradition teaches that compassion is the natural state of the untrained mind once the obstructions have been removed. The Christian tradition teaches that the love of God pervades all of creation and is experienced directly when the passions are stilled. The natural state is love, just as the natural state of a falling object is free fall. You do not need to generate love any more than you need to generate gravity. You need only to stop resisting it. This parallel is remarkably specific. In both cases, the natural state is the state of least resistance. The natural state of an object in a gravitational field is free fall, effortless, weightless, unfelt motion along the geodesic. The natural state of consciousness in the contemplative traditions is compassion, effortless, unconditioned, spontaneous goodwill toward all beings. In both cases, the experience of struggle, weight, and suffering arises only when the natural state is obstructed. The floor obstructs free fall and produces the feeling of weight. The ego obstructs compassion and produces the feeling of isolation. Remove the obstruction, and the natural state reasserts itself. The object falls freely. The consciousness loves freely. The effortlessness is the signature of the natural state. The struggle is the signature of the obstruction. The Desert Father Abba Isaac described the spiritual life as the progressive removal of everything that obstructs the natural movement of the soul toward God. The soul does not need to generate the movement. The movement is built in as the gravitational acceleration of a falling object. The soul needs only to remove the obstructions, the passions, the attachments, the ego constructions that resist the natural curvature of consciousness toward the divine. The spiritual path is not the creation of a new force. It is the release of resistance to a force that was always present. Gravity draws things together. It is the universal attractor, the force that pulls every mass in the universe toward every other mass. Love draws conscious beings together. It is the universal attractor of the conscious world, the force that pulls every consciousness toward every other consciousness. Gravity creates orbits, clusters, galaxies, and the large-scale structure of the universe. Love creates relationships, communities, civilizations, and the large-scale structure of human life. Both are mechanisms of attraction. Both operate against the tendency toward isolation and dispersal. Both create order from what would otherwise be a random, structureless distribution of independent entities. And gravity operates at every scale. It holds the nucleus of an atom together through the contribution of gravitational binding energy, negligible at the atomic scale, but present. It holds your body to the surface of the Earth. It holds the solar system in its configuration. It holds the galaxy in its spiral. It holds galaxy clusters together. And it shapes the large-scale structure of the entire observable universe. There is no scale at which gravity is absent. Love, similarly, operates at every scale of conscious life. It operates between mother and infant, between friends, between strangers, between communities, and in the vision of the contemplative traditions between every conscious being in the universe. The Bodhisattva's vow of universal compassion and the Christian's commandment to love all beings are descriptions of love operating at the cosmic scale, just as the gravitational attraction between galaxy clusters is gravity operating at the cosmic scale. Dante Alighieri, who completed the Divine Comedy in 1320, described the force that moves the entire universe in the final line of the poem: L'amor che move il sol e l'altre stelle, the love that moves the sun and the other stars. This is not poetic license, it is a cosmological claim. Dante is asserting that the force that holds the solar system together, that drives the stars through their courses, that sustains the entire cosmos in its structure, is love. The physical force and the spiritual force are the same force. The movement of the stars and the movement of the heart are driven by the same energy. Rumi, writing in the 13th century, expressed the same insight from the Islamic mystical tradition. Gravitation is the sole cause of the relation of bodies. It is the energy of love that causes elementary particles to merge and that produces all the chemical reactions. It is the attraction of love that keeps the stars in their courses. Whether Rumi used these exact words has been debated by scholars, but the sentiment is consistent with his broader teaching. The force of attraction that pervades the physical universe is the same force that draws the lover toward the beloved, the seeker toward God, the soul toward its source. The pull is one pull. The curvature is one curvature. These parallels are structural, not metaphorical. They describe two phenomena that share the same fundamental properties: universality, geometric rather than forceful operation, invisibility in the natural state, and the function of drawing separate entities toward unity. The question that this investigation will pursue is whether these structural parallels reflect a deeper identity, whether gravity and love are, at the most fundamental level, two manifestations of the same underlying principle. The contemplative traditions have answered this question with a resounding yes. In Christianity, the theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin argued that love is the fundamental energy of the universe, more fundamental than electromagnetism, more fundamental than the nuclear forces, more fundamental even than gravity. Love is the most universal, the most tremendous, and the most mysterious of the cosmic forces, Teilhard wrote. Someday, After mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love, and then, for the second time in the history of the world, man will have discovered fire. Teilhard did not use the word energy loosely. He meant it precisely. Love is a physical force that operates in the universe with the same reality and the same universality as the forces that physics describes. In Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita contains a verse that makes the identification explicit. Krishna, revealing his divine nature to Arjuna, declares, "I am the sapidity in water, I am the light in the sun and the moon, I am the syllable Om in all the Vedas, sound in ether, and ability in man. I am the sweet fragrance of the earth, the brilliance in fire, the life in all beings, and the austerity in ascetics." And then, in a verse that has been translated in various ways, but whose core meaning is unmistakable, "I am the strength of the strong, devoid of desire and attachment. I am the desire in beings that is not contrary to Dharma." Krishna identifies himself with the fundamental forces and qualities of the universe, and among these, with the desire, the attraction, the pull that draws beings toward each other in accordance with the cosmic order. The divine is the attraction is the divine. And the curvature of space-time that we call gravity may be one expression of the same divine attraction that, in conscious beings, we call love. In Buddhism, the concept of pratitya-samutpada dependent origination describes a universe in which nothing exists independently and everything is drawn into relationship with everything else. The pull of dependent origination is not a force in the Newtonian sense. It is a structure, a geometry of mutual dependence that shapes the trajectory of every phenomenon, drawing all things into the web of interconnection that constitutes reality. This geometric pull, operating universally and without exception, is structurally identical to gravity, a curvature of the causal landscape that draws all phenomena toward mutual involvement, just as the curvature of space-time draws all masses toward mutual attraction. In Islam, the 99 names of God include Al-Jami the Gatherer, the one who brings together what is dispersed. This is a divine attribute that operates at every scale, gathering atoms into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into organisms, organisms into communities, souls into the presence of the divine. The Gatherer is the theological name for the universal attraction that physics calls gravity and that the contemplative traditions call love. And the Quran's description of the divine as simultaneously closer than the jugular vein and the sustainer of the cosmic order places the intimate and the cosmic on the same continuum, the same attraction, operating at every scale, from the innermost reaches of the heart to the largest structures in the observable universe. The Jewish tradition's concept of devekut, cleaving to God, the mystical practice of adhering to the divine presence in every moment, describes the spiritual analogue of gravitational orbit. Just as the Earth cleaves to the Sun, following the curved geometry of space-time in an orbit that is both free and bound, the soul cleaves to God, following the curved geometry of consciousness in a spiritual orbit that is both free and bound. The orbit is not a constraint. It is the natural path through a curved space, the geodesic of the soul, the path of least resistance through the curvature of divine love. In the next stage of this investigation, we will examine the physics that connects gravity to entanglement and information, the discoveries that reveal gravity not as a fundamental force, but as an emergent property of the entanglement structure of the universe. Because if gravity is emergent, if it arises from the same entanglement that, in our investigation of distance, we identified as the physical substrate of connection, then the structural parallel between gravity and love becomes something more than a parallel. It becomes an identity, The same entanglement that produces the physical attraction we call gravity may produce the conscious attraction we call love. And the curvature of space-time may be the same curvature that the mystics have always described the curvature of reality toward unity, toward connection, toward the reunion of everything that was never truly separate. Gravity has been drawing things together since the first instant of the universe. Love, the traditions say, has been doing the same. The physics says gravity is the curvature of space-time. The traditions say love is the curvature of reality. The question is whether they are two names for the same curvature, and the evidence from the frontier of theoretical physics, where gravity is being revealed as an emergent property of entanglement, information, and the deep structure of the quantum vacuum, suggests that the answer may be closer than anyone expected. The question is not whether gravity and love are similar. The question is whether they are the same. And the curvature that holds the universe together may be the curvature that the heart has always known. We have established that gravity is not a force but a geometry, that objects do not fall because they are pulled, but because the curvature of space-time guides them along geodesics, and that the structural parallels between gravity and love are too precise and too numerous to be accidental. Both are universal, both are geometric, both are unfelt in the natural state. Both draw separate things toward unity, and both operate at every scale of the systems they govern. Now we must go deeper, because the physics of the past 3 decades has revealed something about gravity that transforms the parallel from suggestive to potentially profound. Gravity is not fundamental, it is emergent. It does not exist at the deepest level of physical reality. It arises from something more basic, something that has everything to do with connection, information, and the entanglement structure of the quantum vacuum. And if gravity emerges from entanglement, and if love is the conscious experience of entanglement, then gravity and love may be two faces of the same coin, two expressions of the same underlying principle, operating in different domains but arising from the same source. The first crack in gravity's fundamental status appeared in 1972, when Jacob Bekenstein made a discovery about black holes that no one expected and that no one, at the time, fully understood. Bekenstein was studying the thermodynamics of black holes when he noticed something strange. A black hole has entropy, a measure of the number of microscopic states that correspond to its macroscopic properties. But the entropy of a black hole is not proportional to its volume, as the entropy of every other physical system is. It is proportional to the surface area of its event horizon. A black hole with twice the surface area has twice the entropy. A black hole with 10 times the surface area has 10 times the entropy. The information content of a black hole lives on its surface, not in its interior. This was the first hint that gravity and information are connected at a deep level. The entropy of a gravitational system, the amount of information needed to describe it, is determined not by the volume of the system but by the area of its boundary. This is the opposite of what you would expect if gravity were a fundamental force operating in a pre-existing three-dimensional space. In three-dimensional space, the information content of a region should scale with the volume. The fact that it scales with the area suggests that gravity does not operate in three-dimensional space. It operates on a surface, and the three-dimensional space we experience is somehow projected from that surface. Stephen Hawking refined Bekenstein's result and derived the precise formula for black hole entropy. The entropy is equal to 1/4 of the event horizon's area, measured in Planck units. This formula, the Bekenstein-Hawking entropy formula, is inscribed on Hawking's tombstone in Westminster Abbey, and it is considered one of the most important equations in theoretical physics. It connects gravity, the black hole, quantum mechanics, the Planck units, and thermodynamics, the entropy, in a single expression. It is a Rosetta Stone, a formula that translates between 3 languages of physics that had previously seemed incompatible. The Bekenstein-Hawking formula encodes a message that took decades to decipher. The message is this: the gravitational properties of a system are determined by the information content of its boundary. The interior of the black hole, the three-dimensional volume enclosed by the event horizon, is not where the physics happens. The physics happens on the surface. The interior is a projection, a rendering, a holographic image generated by the information encoded on the two-dimensional boundary. The gravity you feel, the curvature you experience, the space-time you inhabit is not produced by what is inside. It is produced by what is written on the surface. This is the holographic principle, and it is not limited to black holes. Gerard Hooft proposed in 1993 and Susskind developed in 1995 that the holographic principle applies to any region of space, that the complete information content of any three-dimensional volume is encoded on its two-dimensional boundary. The universe itself may be a holographic projection from a two-dimensional surface at the cosmic horizon, and the gravity that structures the universe, that curves space-time, that holds galaxies together, that guides the planets in their orbits, is generated by the information on that surface. If gravity is generated by information on a boundary, then gravity is not a property of three-dimensional space. It is a property of the information code that generates three-dimensional space. It is, at the deepest level, an informational phenomenon, a consequence of the way data is organized on a surface that is more fundamental than the space it produces. But the deepest implication of the Bekenstein-Hawking formula was not recognized until 1995, when Ted Jacobson, a physicist at the University of Maryland, published a paper that changed the foundations of gravitational physics. Jacobson asked a simple question: if black holes have entropy, and if entropy is proportional to the area of the boundary, then what happens if you apply the laws of thermodynamics to any boundary in space-time, not just the event horizon of a black hole, but any surface, anywhere, in any gravitational field? The answer was astonishing. Jacobson showed that if you assume two things, that the entropy of any region of space is proportional to the area of its boundary, and that the laws of thermodynamics hold at the boundary, then Einstein's field equations follow as a mathematical consequence. He did not need to assume that space-time is curved. He did not need to assume that gravity exists. He needed only thermodynamics and the area-entropy relationship. Einstein's equations, the equations that describe the curvature of space-time and that have been confirmed by a century of experimental observation, emerge automatically from the thermodynamics of information at boundaries. This is one of the most profound results in the history of physics, and it deserves careful attention. For a century, physicists had treated Einstein's equations as fundamental as the bedrock description of how gravity works. Jacobson showed that they are not fundamental. They are thermodynamic. They describe the macroscopic behavior of a deeper, microscopic system, the way the ideal gas law describes the macroscopic behavior of trillions of individual gas molecules. You do not need to know about individual molecules to use the gas law, and you do not need to know about the microscopic structure of space-time to use Einstein's equations. But just as the gas law emerges from the statistical behavior of molecules, Einstein's equations emerge from the statistical behavior of information on the boundaries of space-time. Gravity is not fundamental. Gravity is emergent. Gravity is what information does when it organizes itself on a boundary. Think about what this means. The force that holds you to the surface of the Earth, that keeps the Moon in orbit, that shaped the large-scale structure of the entire observable universe, this force is not a fundamental feature of reality. It is a derived consequence of the way information is organized on the boundaries of space-time. The most familiar force in your daily experience is, at the deepest level, a statistical effect, the macroscopic behavior of a microscopic informational system that has nothing to do with force or curvature in its fundamental description. This is analogous to the way temperature works. Temperature is not a fundamental property of individual molecules. It is a statistical property of large numbers of molecules, a measure of the average kinetic energy of the collective. An individual molecule does not have a temperature, but trillions of molecules interacting statistically produce the macroscopic experience of warmth or cold. Temperature is emergent, and Jacobson showed that gravity is emergent in exactly the same way, arising from the statistical behavior of information, not from any fundamental gravitational field or force. Eric Verlinde at the University of Amsterdam extended Jacobson's insight in 2010 with a proposal that generated enormous excitement and enormous controversy. Verlinde argued that gravity is an entropic force, a force that arises from the tendency of systems to maximize their entropy, the same tendency that makes a stretched rubber band contract. The rubber band is not pulled by a fundamental elastic force. The contraction arises because contracted configurations have more microscopic states, more entropy than stretched configurations. The rubber band moves toward the state of higher entropy, and this movement appears at the macroscopic level as a force. Verlinde proposed that gravity works the same way. When two masses are brought together, the entropy of the system increases. The number of microscopic states available to the system on the holographic boundary grows. The tendency toward higher entropy drives the masses together, and this tendency appears at the macroscopic level as the gravitational attraction between the masses. Gravity is not pulling the masses together. Entropy is driving them together. The gravitational force is the macroscopic expression of a microscopic tendency toward maximum information, maximum disorder, maximum entropy at the holographic boundary. Verlinde's proposal is controversial. It has been tested against astronomical observations with mixed results. Some predictions match the data better than standard dark matter models. Others do not. The debate continues, but the underlying idea that gravity is emergent, arising from the thermodynamics of information on a boundary, is now widely accepted as a serious and potentially correct framework. Jacobson's derivation of Einstein's equations from boundary thermodynamics is not disputed, and a growing community of physicists including Susskind, Maldacena, Van Ramsdonk, Swingle, and many others now regards the emergence of gravity from entanglement as one of the most promising directions in the quest for quantum gravity. The question is not whether gravity emerges from something more fundamental. The question is what that something is and how the emergence works in detail. The question is not whether gravity is emergent. The question is what it emerges from. The implications of Verlinde's proposal for our investigation are immediate. If gravity is an entropic force, if it arises from the maximization of information on a boundary, then gravity is, at its core, a tendency toward maximum connection. Entropy in the information theoretic sense is a measure of the correlations in a system. Maximum entropy corresponds to maximum correlation, maximum entanglement between the parts of the system. The gravitational attraction between two masses is driven by the tendency of their shared boundary to maximize its entanglement. Gravity pulls things together because maximum togetherness corresponds to maximum entanglement, and maximum entanglement corresponds to maximum entropy. And the second law of thermodynamics drives every system toward maximum entropy. Gravity, in this framework, is the universe's tendency toward maximum connection. It is the physical expression of the principle that systems evolve toward the state of greatest correlation, greatest entanglement, greatest mutual involvement. The apple falls to the ground because the joint apple-Earth system has more entanglement entropy when they are together than when they are apart. The universe prefers connection, and gravity is how the universe expresses that preference. The answer, according to the most recent and most exciting developments in theoretical physics, is entanglement. The connection between gravity and entanglement has been developed with increasing precision by multiple research groups. The physicists Chunjun Cao and Sean Carroll at Caltech have shown that the linearized Einstein equations, the approximate version of general relativity that describes weak gravitational fields, can be derived directly from the fictively entanglement structure of a quantum state without any prior assumption about space-time geometry. They showed that if you start with a quantum state and assume only that the entanglement obeys certain constraints, then the spatial geometry and the gravitational dynamics emerge automatically. You do not need to put gravity in. You get gravity out as an inevitable consequence of the way entanglement organizes itself. We explored this in detail in our investigation of distance, where we examined Van Ramsdonk's proof that removing entanglement removes space. Swingl's tensor network construction of spatial geometry from entanglement patterns, and the Ryu-Takayanagi formula that quantitatively relates entanglement entropy to geometric area. These results establish that space is woven from entanglement. But gravity is the curvature of space, and if space is woven from entanglement, then gravity, the curvature of that space, is determined by the entanglement structure. More entanglement in a region means more spatial geometry, which means more gravitational effect. The curvature of space-time is the curvature of the entanglement pattern. Gravity is what entanglement looks like when it organizes itself into a spatial geometry. The physicist Maldaceno's ADS CFT correspondence provides the mathematical laboratory in which this relationship has been most thoroughly tested. In ADS CFT, the gravitational physics of the bulk, the higher dimensional space with gravity, is exactly equivalent to the entanglement physics of the boundary, the lower dimensional surface without gravity. Every gravitational phenomenon in the bulk has a corresponding entanglement phenomenon on the boundary. The formation of a black hole in the bulk corresponds to the thermalization of entanglement on the boundary. The emission of Hawking radiation corresponds to the redistribution of entanglement, and the curvature of space-time in the bulk corresponds to the gradient of entanglement on the boundary. The power of the ADS CFT correspondence lies in its exactness. It is not a suggestive analogy between gravity and entanglement. It is a mathematical equivalence, a proof that the gravitational dynamics of the bulk are identical to the entanglement dynamics of the boundary. A calculation performed in the gravitational framework gives exactly the same answer as the same calculation performed in the entanglement framework. The two descriptions are not similar. They are the same description, written in two different mathematical languages. Learning to translate between these languages is the central task of 21st century theoretical physics. The correspondence has been tested in thousands of independent calculations over the past 28 years. It has been applied to black hole physics, condensed matter physics, quantum information theory, and the structure of space-time itself. In every case, the translation between gravity and entanglement has been flawless. No contradiction has ever been found. No calculation has ever failed to match. The equivalence is, by the standards of theoretical physics, as well established as any result that has not been directly tested in a laboratory experiment. This equivalence is not approximate, it is exact. It has been tested in thousands of calculations and has never produced a contradiction. And it tells us something remarkable about gravity. Gravity is the geometric encoding of entanglement, the curvature that guides the planets in their orbits, that holds galaxies together, that bends light around massive objects, is not a fundamental property of a fundamental space-time. It is the geometric expression of the pattern of quantum correlations on a boundary that is more fundamental than the space-time it generates. Now let us bring this back to our comparison with love. If gravity is the geometric expression of entanglement, the physical manifestation of the pattern of quantum correlations that connects all things, then gravity is, at its most fundamental level, a manifestation of connection, not connection in the vague inspirational sense, connection in the precise mathematical, quantum mechanical sense of entanglement. The non-local correlation between quantum systems that the 2022 Nobel Prize confirmed, and that our investigation of distance examined in detail. And in our investigation of distance, we reached a specific conclusion about the relationship between entanglement and love. Love is the subjective experience of entanglement. Love is what it feels like from the inside, when two conscious systems recognize their shared quantum ground, when the decoherence that separates them thins enough for the entanglement beneath to become experientially real. If gravity is the geometric expression of entanglement, and love is the conscious experience of entanglement, then gravity and love are two expressions of the same thing. They are both expressions of entanglement. They both arise from the same quantum correlations that connect all things. The difference between them is not a difference of substance. It is a difference of perspective. Gravity is entanglement seen from the outside, measured by instruments, described by equations, expressed as the curvature of a spatial geometry. Love is entanglement seen from the inside, felt by consciousness, described by poets, expressed as the curvature of an emotional landscape that draws conscious beings toward each other. This is not a New Age claim dressed in scientific language. It is a logical consequence of three established results. First, gravity is the geometric expression of entanglement. Van Ramsdonk, Ryu Takayanagi, Maldacena. Second, entanglement is the non-local quantum correlation that connects systems regardless of distance. Bell, Aspect, 2022 Nobel. Third, love is the conscious experience of recognizing the connection that entanglement creates between conscious systems, as argued in our investigation of distance, supported by the neuroscience of empathy, mirror neurons, and the contemplative traditions. If gravity expresses entanglement geometrically, and love expresses entanglement experientially, then gravity and love are two modes of expression of the same underlying reality. The physicist Freeman Dyson once observed, "The universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. The queerness may lie precisely here. The force that structures the cosmos and the force that structures the heart may be the same force, operating in different domains, perceived through different instruments, described in different languages, but arising from the same entanglement that constitutes the ground of all physical reality. The curvature is one curvature. The pull is one pull. The entanglement is one entanglement. And the separation between physics and spirituality, the assumption that gravity belongs to science and love belongs to religion, may be the deepest and most consequential illusion of all. The contemplative traditions have been describing this identity for millennia in every language available to them. In Buddhism, the concept of karuna compassion is not described as an emotion that arises in the mind. It is described as the natural response to the perception of interdependence. When you truly see that all beings are interconnected through dependent origination, that no being exists independently, that every being's suffering is conditioned by every other being's actions, then compassion arises spontaneously, as naturally and as inevitably as gravity pulls a stone toward the earth. Compassion is not something you generate through effort. It is something that emerges when the perception of interconnection becomes clear. It is the emotional geodesic, the path of least resistance through the curved landscape of conscious experience, the trajectory that consciousness naturally follows when the obstructions of ego and ignorance are removed. The Buddhist teacher Shantideva formalized this in his Bodhisattva with an argument of extraordinary logical precision. He argued that the distinction between your suffering and another person's suffering is a construction of the ego, a false boundary imposed by the mind's habit of identifying with one body and excluding all others. The suffering itself is the same. The pain is the same. The only thing that differentiates my suffering from your suffering is the ego's insistence on drawing a boundary that reality does not contain. When the boundary is seen through, when the emptiness of the self-other distinction is directly perceived, compassion is automatic. You respond to the other's suffering exactly as you respond to your own, because you see that the distinction between own and other was never real. The gravitational attraction of compassion operates the same way. It does not distinguish. It does not prefer. It pulls equally, universally, toward every suffering being, because the perception of interdependence recognizes no boundary between one being's suffering and another's. In Christianity, the concept of agape, the unconditional, self-giving love, that is, the nature of God and the vocation of the human person, is described not as an achievement of moral willpower, but as a participation in the divine nature. We love because he first loved us, the first epistle of John states. The love does not originate in the human will. It originates in the divine ground, in the fundamental structure of reality that is constituted by love. The human person participates in this love by removing the obstructions that prevent it from flowing freely, the obstructions of sin, ego, pride, and self-enclosure that are, in the physical framework, the decoherence barriers that prevent the entanglement from being consciously perceived. The Greek Church Fathers developed this into a comprehensive theology of participation. Maximus the Confessor argued that every created thing has a logos, a rational principle, a divine idea, a purpose embedded in the structure of reality by the logos that created it. And the logos of every created thing is oriented toward unity, toward the reunion of the created with the Creator, toward the gathering of the many into the one. This orientation toward unity is the gravitational pull of the divine love operating at every level of creation, from the physical attraction between masses to the spiritual attraction between the soul and God. The logos of a stone is to fall, the logos of a soul is to love, and both are expressions of the same divine orientation toward unity that is the deepest structure of the created order. Meister Eckhart described the return of the soul to God in language that could have been drawn directly from a textbook on general relativity. The soul, Eckhart wrote, comes to God by subtraction, not by addition. The soul does not need to acquire something new in order to reach God. It needs to remove everything that is not God, every attachment, every ego construction, every self-referential thought that creates the illusion of separation between the soul and its divine ground. When the subtraction is complete, what remains is God, the ground that was always there, the curvature that was always present, the attraction that was always pulling. The soul falls into God the way an object falls in a gravitational field, not by being pushed or pulled by an external force, but by following the natural geodesic of a reality that is curved toward unity. Gregory of Nyssa, the 4th century Cappadocian father, described the divine life as an infinite journey into the infinite. The soul does not reach God and stop. It falls into God and keeps falling endlessly, inexhaustibly, without ever reaching a bottom, because the divine depth is infinite. This is the spiritual analogue of an orbit that spirals inward without ever reaching the center, the geodesic, through a curved space that has no endpoint, only deeper and deeper curvature, greater and greater proximity, more and more intimate union that never becomes complete because the infinite cannot be exhausted. The gravitational orbit and the spiritual orbit share the same structure: endless approach, deepening intimacy, and the impossibility of final arrival at a center that is infinite. The Christian concept of perichoresis, the mutual indwelling of the three persons of the Trinity, in which each person is fully present in each other. Person without confusion or separation acquires extraordinary significance in this context. If gravity is the geometric expression of entanglement, then perichoresis is the theological description of maximum entanglement, the state in which the quantum correlations between the persons are complete, total, and without residual separation. The Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are maximally entangled, and this maximal entanglement is what generates the divine life, the divine love, and the divine attraction that the created universe participates in through its own, less perfect, but nonetheless real entanglement. In Islam, the Sufi master Ibn Ata'illah wrote in his Hikam, "Nothing in existence veils you from God. Rather, it is you who are veiled from seeing Him. For were anything to veil you from Him, that which veils you would conceal Him. But nothing conceals Him because He is the one who manifests everything. The gravitational field is not concealed by the objects within it. The objects exist within the gravitational field, shaped by it, guided by it, sustained by it. Similarly, the divine love is not concealed by the created world. The created world exists within the divine love, shaped by it, guided by it, sustained by it. The only veil is the mind's failure to perceive what is already present everywhere, the curvature that holds everything together, the attraction that draws everything toward its source. In Hinduism, the Kena Upanishad poses a series of questions that zero in on the same insight. What is it that makes the mind think? What is it that makes the breath move? What is it that makes the eyes see? The answer, in each case, is Brahman, the ground of being that is the source of all activity, all perception, all movement. Brahman does not push from behind. Brahman attracts from within. The mind thinks because Brahman within the mind draws it toward understanding. The breath moves because Brahman within the body draws it toward life. And the objects in the universe move because Brahman within the fabric of space-time draws them toward each other through the curvature that physics calls gravity and that the Upanishad calls the divine attraction operating at the heart of all phenomena. The convergence is now becoming precise enough to state as a hypothesis, not a conclusion, but a hypothesis worthy of serious examination. Hypothesis: gravity and love are two manifestations of the same fundamental principle, the principle of entanglement, which produces geometric curvature in the physical domain and experiential attraction in the conscious domain. Gravity is entanglement expressed as space-time geometry. Love is entanglement expressed as conscious experience. Both arise from the same quantum correlations. Both produce attraction between separate systems. Both operate universally. And both are emergent. Neither gravity nor love is fundamental in the way that entanglement is fundamental. Both emerge from the deeper reality of quantum connection that constitutes the ground of the physical universe. This hypothesis, if correct, has a specific and testable implication. Anything that increases entanglement between conscious systems should produce effects that are structurally similar to gravitational attraction. The systems should be drawn together. The boundaries between them should thin. The experienced distance should decrease. And the subjective experience of this process should be love, the feeling of attraction, of connection, of the dissolution of separation. This is exactly what the contemplative practices describe. Meditation in community produces a felt sense of connection that experienced practitioners describe as palpable a field, an atmosphere, a gravitational pull that draws the members of the community toward a shared center. The Buddhist Sangha, the Christian koinonia, the Islamic Jama'ah, the Hindu satsang. Every tradition describes the experience of communal practice in terms that echo the language of gravitational attraction. People are drawn together, boundaries dissolve, a center of gravity emerges that is not located in any individual, but in the shared field that the collective practice generates. This is what maximum entanglement feels like from the inside, an irresistible, effortless, geometric pull toward unity. This hypothesis is not proven. It may not be provable in the strict experimental sense, but it is consistent with everything that physics has established about the emergent nature of gravity, everything that consciousness research has suggested about the non-local nature of mind, and everything that the contemplative traditions have described about the nature of love as the fundamental structure of reality. The convergence is too precise to be dismissed, and the implications, as we will explore in the remaining stages of this investigation, are too profound to be ignored. In the next stage, we will examine what happens when you apply this hypothesis to the neuroscience of love, the physics of attraction, and the contemplative practices that the traditions have developed for deepening the experience of connection. Because if gravity and love are both expressions of entanglement, then the practices that deepen love are not merely psychological exercises. They are physical interventions in the entanglement structure of reality, interventions that change the curvature, that alter the geometry, and that may, at the deepest level, affect the gravitational field itself. The curvature that holds the planets in their orbits may be the same curvature that the heart follows when it falls in love. And the force that shaped the cosmos from the first moment of the Big Bang may be the same force that draws you toward the people you love, the beauty you seek, and the truth you have always known but cannot quite articulate. The whisper is getting louder, and the voice that whispers is not speaking from outside the universe. It is speaking from within the fabric of the universe itself, from the entanglement that weaves space-time into existence, from the correlations that produce the curvature we call gravity, from the connections that conscious beings experience as the irresistible, indefinable, unmistakable pull of love. The physicist Arthur Eddington, who confirmed Einstein's theory in 1919, wrote near the end of his life, "The stuff of the world is mind stuff. The mind stuff is not spread in space and time. These are part of the cyclic scheme ultimately derived out of it." If Eddington was right, if the fundamental stuff of the universe is consciousness, and if space and time are derived from it, then gravity is derived from consciousness too, and the curvature that consciousness generates in the physical domain is gravity, and the curvature that consciousness generates in the experiential domain is love, and they are the same curvature generated by the same consciousness from the same entanglement in the same universe that is, at every level and in every direction, curved toward connection. We have established that gravity is not a fundamental force. It is emergent, arising from the entanglement structure of the quantum vacuum through the thermodynamic mechanism that Jacobson, Verlinde, and the ADS CFT correspondence describe. Gravity is the geometric expression of entanglement. It is what connection looks like when viewed from the outside, measured by instruments, described by equations, expressed as the curvature of a spatial geometry that draws masses together. And we have proposed the hypothesis that love is the experiential expression of the same entanglement, what connection feels like when viewed from the inside, experienced by consciousness, expressed as the curvature of an emotional landscape that draws conscious beings together. Now we must test this hypothesis against the hardest evidence available, the neuroscience of love, because if love is merely a chemical reaction in the brain, a cocktail of oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin evolved by natural selection to promote pair bonding and reproduction, then the comparison with gravity is nothing more than a pretty metaphor. But if love, when examined at the deepest level available to science, turns out to have properties that the chemical explanation cannot account for, properties that are structural, non-local, and fundamentally about the dissolution of boundaries between separate systems, then the comparison with gravity becomes something more than metaphor. It becomes a hypothesis about the deep structure of reality. Let us begin with what the neuroscience does explain, because it explains a great deal. The neuroscience of love begins with the neurochemistry of attachment. When you fall in love, romantic love, the intoxicating, all-consuming, world-transforming experience that has been the subject of poetry, music, and literature. For as long as humans have been creating culture, your brain undergoes a specific, measurable, reproducible series of neurochemical changes. Dopamine floods the reward circuits of the ventral tegmental area, and the nucleus accumbens, producing the euphoria, the motivation, the obsessive focus on the beloved that characterize early, romantic attachment. Norepinephrine surges, producing the racing heart, the sweaty palms, the inability to sleep or eat that lovers experience. And serotonin drops to levels comparable to those measured in patients with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which explains the obsessive, intrusive, inescapable thoughts about the beloved that dominate the lover's consciousness. The anthropologist Helen Fisher at Rutgers University has mapped this neurochemistry using fMRI, identifying the specific brain regions that activate when a person looks at a photograph of their beloved. The caudate nucleus, rich in dopamine receptors, lights up with activity. The ventral tegmental area, the brain's primary dopamine factory, shows enhanced activation. And the prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment, evaluation, and critical assessment, shows reduced activity, which explains why love is famously blind. The brain in love is not assessing the beloved rationally. It is locked in a dopamine-driven feedback loop that amplifies the positive and suppresses the negative, producing the idealized perception that lovers have of each other. Fisher's research revealed a further finding that is directly relevant to our investigation. The brain regions activated by romantic love are not the same regions that process ordinary emotions. Love does not activate the cortical regions associated with emotional processing. It activates the subcortical regions associated with motivation, reward, and drive, the same regions that are activated by hunger, thirst, and other fundamental biological needs. Love, Fisher concluded, is not an emotion. It is a drive, a fundamental motivational system that is as basic to human biology as the drive to eat or drink. It is not something you choose to feel. It is something that grips you from below the level of conscious choice, from the deepest motivational circuits of the brain, the same way hunger grips you when your blood sugar drops, or thirst grips you when you are dehydrated. This finding is important because it suggests that love is not a surface phenomenon, not a cultural construction, not a cognitive decision, not an emotion that can be rationally managed. It is a deep structural feature of the brain that operates at the level of fundamental biological drives. And fundamental biological drives, unlike surface emotions, are not arbitrary. They track real features of the environment that the organism needs to survive. Hunger tracks the real need for nutrients. Thirst tracks the real need for water. If love is a fundamental drive of the same type, then love tracks a real need. A need that is as genuine and as non-negotiable as the need for food or water, the need for connection. This is consistent with the entanglement framework. If consciousness is constituted by integrated information, and if integrated information increases when systems become entangled, then the drive toward connection is the drive toward increased consciousness, the drive toward greater phi, greater integration, greater wholeness. Love is not a luxury. It is a biological imperative driven by the same fundamental need that drives every quantum system toward maximum entanglement, the tendency toward the state of greatest correlation, greatest connection, greatest integration. As romantic love matures into long-term attachment, the neurochemistry shifts. The dopamine-driven frenzy of early love gives way to a calmer, deeper connection mediated by oxytocin and vasopressin. Oxytocin, released during physical touch, eye contact, breastfeeding, and sexual intimacy, produces feelings of trust, safety, and bonding. It reduces cortisol levels, lowering stress. It enhances the empathic response, increasing sensitivity to the partner's emotional state, and it literally changes the brain's architecture. Long-term partners show increased neural synchronization. Their brain activity patterns become more similar over time, as if the two brains are gradually tuning into the same frequency. This neural synchronization is one of the most remarkable and least understood findings in the neuroscience of love. Uri Hasson and colleagues at Princeton University have shown that when two people engage in deep conversation, their brain activity patterns synchronize. The listener's brain activity mirrors the speaker's, with a delay of a few seconds that reflects the processing time. But in the closest relationships, the synchronization goes further. The listener's brain sometimes anticipates the speaker's patterns, activating before the speaker has produced the corresponding words or thoughts. The brains are not merely mirroring each other, they are predicting each other. They are, in a specific and measurable sense, becoming one system. The neuroscientist Simone Chemay-Tsori at the University of Haifa has documented what she calls inter-brain synchrony, the phenomenon in which two people performing a cooperative task show synchronized. Oscillations in their brain activity, measured by simultaneous EEG or FNERS. The synchronization is strongest in the gamma band, the same 40 Hz frequency that we have encountered throughout this series as the signature of conscious awareness, meditative states, and enhanced quantum coherence. Couples who report higher levels of emotional connection show stronger interbrain synchrony. Mothers and infants show especially strong synchrony during face-to-face interaction. And the synchrony is not merely a reflection of shared sensory input. It persists even when the two people are performing different tasks, as long as they are emotionally connected. The implications of interbrain synchrony are profound. Two brains, in two separate skulls, separated by space, connected by no physical medium other than air, sound, and light, are oscillating in the same pattern at the same frequency. They are, in a precise neurological sense, becoming one system. The boundary between your brain and my brain, a boundary that neuroscience usually treats as absolute, is, during deep connection, partially dissolved. The two brains are not merely communicating, they are synchronizing, they are tuning into each other, they are, at the neural level, merging. The physicist Erwin Schrödinger described entanglement as the moment when two systems become so correlated that the state of neither can be fully described without reference to the other. This is exactly what interbrain synchrony shows. The state of one brain cannot be fully described without reference to the state of the other brain. They have become, in the technical quantum mechanical sense, entangled not at the level of individual particles, which decoherence would rapidly destroy, but at the level of macroscopic oscillation patterns, sustained by the biological mechanisms that protect quantum coherence in warm, wet systems. Now here is what the chemical explanation cannot account for. The chemical explanation says that love is caused by neurochemicals, that oxytocin causes bonding, that dopamine causes desire, that the neurochemistry is the mechanism, and the experience of love is the byproduct. But the interbrain synchrony data suggests that something more is happening. The synchronization between two brains is not produced by the neurochemicals. It is correlated with them, but it is not reducible to them. No known neurochemical mechanism can explain how two brains, in two separate skulls, come to oscillate in the same pattern at the same frequency. The brains are not connected by a chemical signal. They are not connected by an electromagnetic signal. The interbrain synchrony persists at distances and in configurations that rule out direct electromagnetic coupling. They are connected by something else, something that the standard neuroscience framework does not have a name for. In the entanglement framework, the name is obvious. The brains are quantum entangled. The The sustained, intimate interaction between two people in a close relationship creates quantum correlations between their neural states. Correlations that persist beneath the decoherent surface and that manifest at the macroscopic level as the interbrain synchrony that the EEG and FNIRs detect. The synchrony is not caused by a signal traveling between the brains. It is caused by the entanglement between them, the non-local quantum correlation that connects the two systems without any mediating signal, just as entanglement connects two particles without any mediating signal. The mother-child bond provides the most striking evidence for this interpretation. During pregnancy, fetal cells cross the placental barrier and take up permanent residence in the mother's body, including her brain. This phenomenon, called microchimerism, means that the mother's brain literally contains cells from her child, and these cells persist for decades after birth. The mother and child are not merely emotionally bonded, they are biologically merged, sharing cellular material, sharing DNA, sharing the molecular components from which quantum states are constructed. If quantum entanglement can be established between biological systems through sustained physical contact and shared cellular material, then the mother-child bond is the most entangled relationship in human life. And the extraordinary depth of maternal love may be the conscious experience of this extraordinary depth of entanglement. This biological merger has no parallel in any other human relationship. The mother's immune system recognizes the fetal cells as foreign, but does not destroy them. They are tolerated, integrated, and in some cases actively recruited to sites of tissue damage, where they participate in repair processes. The mother's body does not merely accept the presence of the child's cells, it uses them. The boundary between mother and child, the most fundamental biological boundary in human life, is not maintained by the body. It is dissolved by the body. The biology of the mother-child bond is a biology of merger, not of separation. If entanglement can be established through shared cellular material, then the mother-child bond is the densest entanglement network in human experience. Every fetal cell in the mother's brain is a quantum system whose state is correlated with the quantum states of the child's body from which it originated. The mother carries, within her own brain, a physical substrate for non-local correlation with her child, a correlation that does not require signals, does not require proximity, and does not require any mechanism that propagates through space. The mother knows her child across distance not because of some mystical sixth sense, but because she literally contains part of her child's quantum system within her own neural tissue. The psychologist Ruth Feldman at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya has documented the biological synchrony between mother and infant with extraordinary precision. Heart rates synchronize, cortisol levels synchronize, oxytocin levels rise and fall in tandem, and the interbrain synchrony, measured by simultaneous EEG, is stronger between mother and infant than between any other pair of individuals. The mother and infant are, biologically and neurologically, functioning as a single system, a single entangled system in the quantum framework whose component parts happen to be located in two separate bodies. Integrated information theory provides the theoretical bridge. In IIT, consciousness is identical to integrated information phi, which measures how much a system is more than the sum of its parts. When two systems become entangled, their joint phi can exceed the sum of their individual phis. The whole becomes more than the parts. A new, higher-order consciousness emerges that is not located in either brain individually, but in the combined, entangled system that the two brains constitute together. Love, in the IIT framework, is the subjective experience of this emergence, the feeling that accompanies the creation of a new, higher-order integrated system from what were previously two separate systems. The experience of becoming one that lovers describe is not metaphorical, It is the phenomenological report of a genuine increase in integrated information, a genuine emergence of a new conscious entity from the entanglement of two previously separate minds. The philosopher Alva Noah has argued that consciousness is not located inside the brain. It is enacted in the dynamic interaction between the brain, the body, and the environment. If Noah is right, then the consciousness that emerges from the entanglement of two minds is not located in either brain. It is enacted in the space between them, in the relationship, the interaction, the dynamic mutual shaping that two minds perform on each other when they are in deep connection. The love between two people is not inside either person. It is between them. It is in the entanglement. It is in the connection itself, which is as real and as ontologically substantial as either of the minds it connects. This resonates with Martin Buber's insight that the I-thou relationship is not a property of either the I or the thou. It is a property of the between, the space of genuine encounter in which both the I and the thou are transformed by the meeting. Love is not something that one person feels for another. Love is something that happens between persons, a new reality that emerges from their connection, a reality that did not exist before the connection, and that exists only as long as the connection is maintained. In the entanglement framework, this between reality is the higher order phi that emerges from the entanglement of two previously separate systems, a new consciousness, a new geometry, a new curvature in the landscape of reality. This is precisely what gravity does in the physical domain. When two masses come together, their joint gravitational field is not merely the sum of their individual fields. The combined system has a geometry that exceeds, that is qualitatively different from the sum of the geometries of the individual masses. A binary star system has a geometry that neither star has alone. A galaxy has a geometry that no individual star possesses. Gravity creates higher-order structures from lower-order components, and the geometry of the higher-order structure is genuinely new, not reducible to the geometries of the parts. Love does the same thing with consciousness. It creates higher-order conscious systems from lower-order components, and the phi of the higher-order system is genuinely new, not reducible to the phis of the individual minds. The parallel is exact. Gravity creates emergent geometry from entanglement. Love creates emergent consciousness from entanglement. Both produce something new from the connection of previously separate systems. Both involve a qualitative increase that exceeds the sum of the parts. And both are driven by the same underlying process, the increase of entanglement between the component systems. The contemplative traditions have described this process with a depth and precision that the neuroscience is only beginning to match. In Buddhism, the practice of metta-loving-kindness meditation is the systematic cultivation of love as a quality of attention. The practitioner begins by generating feelings of warmth and goodwill toward themselves. Then they extend these feelings to a loved one, then to a neutral person, then to a difficult person, and finally to all sentient beings without exception. The practice is progressive. It systematically dissolves the boundaries that the ego maintains between self and other, between friend and enemy, between near and far. Each stage of the practice reduces a layer of the decoherence that separates the practitioner's consciousness from the consciousness of the target. And the culmination of the practice, the extension of boundless love to all beings everywhere, is the state of maximum entanglement between the practitioner's consciousness and every other consciousness in the universe. The neuroscience of meta-meditation, documented by Richard Davidson and Antoine Lutz at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, shows that the practice produces measurable changes in brain structure and function. Long-term meta-practitioners show increased grey matter in the insula, the region associated with embodied empathy. They show enhanced connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, the connection that allows cognitive awareness to modulate emotional response. They show the extraordinary 4-0 Hertz gamma oscillations that we have associated with enhanced quantum coherence, and they show increased inter-brain synchrony with other practitioners during group meditation, as if the collective practice is creating a shared entanglement field that connects the individual consciousnesses into a single higher-order system. Davidson's research has documented something remarkable about long-term meta-practitioners. Their default state, the state of their brain when they are not meditating, not practicing, not doing anything in particular, is different from the default state of non-practitioners. The practitioners' brains show enhanced baseline connectivity between regions associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and present moment awareness. Their default mode network, the brain's self-referential system, the neural substrate of the ego, is less dominant, less active, less controlling. The practice has not merely produced temporary states of enhanced connection. It has restructured the brain's baseline architecture in the direction of permanent openness, permanent connection, permanent reduced decoherence. This is the neural evidence for what the traditions call attainment, the permanent transformation of consciousness that results from sustained contemplative practice. The attainment is not a transient experience that comes and goes. It is a structural change in the brain that persists between practice sessions and that deepens over years and decades of practice. The practitioner's brain has been permanently altered in the direction of greater connection, greater integration, and greater sensitivity to the entanglement that underlies the decoherent surface of ordinary experience. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition describes the most advanced practitioners as radiating a quality called blessings, a palpable field of warmth, peace, and well-being that other people can feel when they are in the practitioner's presence. This is usually dismissed by skeptics as suggestion, expectation, or social conformity, but in the entanglement framework, it has a physical interpretation. The advanced practitioner has reduced their internal decoherence to such a degree that their entanglement with the surrounding environment is unusually strong. The field of blessings is the perceptible effect of enhanced entanglement, the experience of being drawn into the gravitational field, so to speak, of a consciousness whose curvature toward connection is unusually deep. In Christianity, the practice of contemplative prayer produces structurally identical effects. The Hesychast tradition's Jesus prayer, repeated with each breath thousands of times per day, progressively stills the internal noise of the mind and opens the practitioner to the experience of the divine presence that pervades all things. The culmination of the Hesychast path is theoria contemplative vision, the direct perception of God in all things. And the advanced Hesychast, like the advanced Buddhist practitioner, is described as radiating a quality of presence that others can feel. The light of Tabor, the uncreated light that Gregory Palamas identified as the direct manifestation of the divine energies in the purified human person. The structural parallel is exact. In both traditions, the practice reduces internal decoherence. The reduction of decoherence enhances the practitioner's entanglement with the surrounding reality. The enhanced entanglement produces a perceptible field of connection, warmth, and attraction that others experience as love, blessings, or the divine presence. And the subjective experience of the practitioner is the progressive dissolution of the boundary between self and world, the gravitational collapse of the ego into the larger reality that was always present, but that the decoherence of ordinary consciousness concealed. The Christian theologian Karl Rahner described this process in language that bridges the contemplative and the physical. The human person is the event in which the universe comes to know itself. The universe, through the practice of contemplative love, is not merely observed by consciousness, it is drawn into consciousness. The boundary between observer and observed dissolves, and the dissolution of this boundary is the spiritual analogue of the gravitational merger of two black holes. A catastrophic, irreversible, profoundly creative event in which two previously separate systems become one, and the geometry of the combined system is qualitatively new. The Christian tradition of spiritual friendship, developed by Aelred of Revolx in the 12th century, describes a specific form of love that bridges the human and the divine. Aelred argued that genuine friendship is not merely a human relationship. It is a participation in the divine love, a specific channel through which the gravitational pull of the divine operates in human life. God is friendship, Aelred wrote, modifying the Johannine. God is love, to emphasize the relational, interpersonal character of the divine reality. The friend is not merely someone you enjoy spending time with. The friend is a face of God, a specific locus of the divine entanglement, a particular curvature in the gravitational field of love that draws you toward the center by way of another person. This insight that human love is a specific expression of divine love, that the attraction between persons is a channel for the attraction between the soul and God, has profound implications in the entanglement framework. If all entanglement arises from the same quantum vacuum, and if the vacuum is the physical correlate of the divine ground, then every instance of human love, every moment of connection, every experience of interbrain synchrony, every dissolution of the boundary between self and other is a local expression of the universal entanglement that constitutes the divine reality. To love another person is to participate in the entanglement structure of the universe. It is to align your consciousness with the curvature that holds the cosmos together. It is, in the most literal sense available to physics, to participate in God. In Islam, the Sufi practice of dhikr, the continuous remembrance of God through the repetition of divine names, serves the same function. The repetition of the divine name progressively aligns the practitioner's consciousness with the divine reality that the name invokes. Each repetition is a pulse of coherence that reduces the internal decoherence of the ordinary mind and strengthens the entanglement between the practitioner's consciousness and the divine ground. The Sufi master Jalaluddin Rumi described the cumulative effect with an image of gravitational attraction. Love is the bridge between you and everything. The bridge is the entanglement. The love is the experience of crossing it, and the divine name is the vehicle that carries consciousness across the bridge, from the decoherent isolation of the ego to the entangled unity of the divine presence. The Sufi concept of fana annihilation of the ego self in the divine is the most radical description of gravitational merger in the contemplative literature. In fana, the boundary between the individual consciousness and the universal consciousness does not merely thin, it disappears entirely. The separate self ceases to exist as a separate self and is absorbed into the divine reality, the way a drop of water is absorbed into the ocean. But the absorption is not destruction, it is completion. The drop does not cease to exist. It discovers that it was always the ocean, that the boundary that defined it as a separate entity was maintained by decoherence, not by reality, and that the reality beneath the decoherence is unity, connection, and the boundless love that is the nature of the divine. In Hinduism, the practice of bhakti devotional love directed toward the divine is explicitly described as a gravitational process. The Narada Bhakti Sutra, one of the foundational texts of Bhakti Yoga, describes the stages of devotional love in terms that echo the physics of gravitational attraction. The devotee begins at a distance from the divine, worshipping, admiring, longing. As the practice deepens, the distance decreases. The devotee is drawn closer to the divine, pulled by a force that intensifies as the distance shrinks. And at the culmination of the path, the distance reaches zero, the devotee and the divine merge, and the gravitational collapse produces the bliss of union that the tradition calls Ananda. The Bhagavata Purana describes Krishna's relationship with the gopis, the milkmaids of Vrindavan, who are drawn to Krishna by an irresistible attraction that overrides every social convention, every rational calculation, and every competing desire. The gopis do not choose to love Krishna. They are pulled toward him by a force that they cannot resist and cannot explain, a force that operates beneath the level of conscious choice, beneath the level of rational analysis, beneath the level of individual will. The force is love, but it is described in terms that are indistinguishable from the description of gravity: universal, irresistible, geometric, operating at every distance and drawing everything toward a single center. The Narada Bhakti Sutra identifies 9 forms of devotion, 9 modes of gravitational attraction between the devotee and the divine: listening to the divine name, singing the divine name, remembering the divine, serving the divine, worshipping the divine, surrendering to the divine, befriending the divine, and offering everything to the divine. Each form is a different angle of gravitational approach, a different geodesic through the curved landscape of devotional consciousness, leading to the same center from a different direction. The multiplicity of paths reflects the multiplicity of geodesics in a curved space. Many paths, one destination, and the destination is the same, regardless of the path. The gravitational center of the divine love that draws all things toward itself. The Jewish tradition provides a complementary framework through the Song of Songs, which the rabbinical tradition has interpreted as an allegory of the love between God and Israel. The beloved and the lover search for each other through the streets of the city, losing and finding each other, drawn together by an attraction that neither controls and that neither can escape. The attraction is mutual. God seeks the soul as the soul seeks God. This mutuality is precisely what the physics of gravity describes. The curvature is mutual. Mass tells spacetime how to curve, and spacetime tells mass how to move. God tells the soul how to love, and the soul tells God how to manifest. The attraction flows in both directions, and the geometry of the relationship is shaped by both parties simultaneously. The convergence across every tradition is now complete. The Buddhist practitioner cultivates metta until the boundaries between self and other dissolve. The Christian contemplative prays until the boundary between soul and God dissolves. The Sufi repeats the divine name until the boundary between lover and beloved dissolves. The Hindu devotee surrenders to the divine attraction until the boundary between devotee and deity dissolves. And in every case, the dissolution of the boundary is described as a gravitational process, a falling, a collapsing, a merging, an irresistible attraction that draws the separate toward the unified, the many toward the one, the isolated toward the connected. The physics says that gravity is the geometric expression of entanglement, the curvature of space produced by the pattern of quantum correlations. The neuroscience says that love produces interbrain synchrony, neural merger, and the creation of higher-order conscious systems from previously separate minds. The contemplative traditions say that the deepest experience of love is a gravitational collapse of the boundary between self and other, between self and world, between self and God. And all three are describing the same process: the increase of entanglement between previously separate systems, expressed geometrically as curvature, neurologically as synchrony, and experientially as love. In the final stage of this investigation, we will ask the ultimate question: if gravity and love are two expressions of the same entanglement, then what does this tell us about the nature of the universe? Is the universe, at its deepest level, a love story? Is the curvature that holds the cosmos together the same curvature that the heart follows when it falls? And is the whisper that you sometimes hear the quiet, persistent, inarticulate sense that everything is connected? that separation is not the final word, that there is a force beneath the surface of things that draws everything toward everything else, is that whisper the sound of gravity, speaking in the language of consciousness, telling you what it has always been telling the stars. The evidence is nearly complete. The final synthesis awaits. We have now assembled every piece of the argument. The physics has shown us that gravity is not a fundamental force but an emergent property of the entanglement structure of the quantum vacuum, the geometric curvature produced by the pattern of quantum correlations that connects all things. The neuroscience has shown us that love produces inter-brain synchrony, neural merger, biological entanglement through microchimerism, and the emergence of higher-order conscious systems from previously separate minds. The contemplative traditions have described love as a gravitational process, an irresistible attraction that draws separate conscious beings toward unity, dissolving the boundaries that decoherence maintains and revealing the connection that was always present beneath the surface of apparent separation. Now, we must state the synthesis, and we must state it with the intellectual honesty that this investigation demands, distinguishing what the evidence establishes from what it suggests, what is confirmed from what is speculative, and what we know from what we hope. Here is what the evidence establishes. Gravity is emergent. This is confirmed by Jacobson's derivation of Einstein's equations from boundary thermodynamics, by the Ryu-Takayanagi formula relating entanglement entropy to geometric area, by Van Ramsdonk's proof that removing entanglement removes space, and by the exact equivalence of gravitational and entanglement dynamics in the ADS CFT correspondence. Gravity arises from entanglement. The curvature of space-time is the geometric expression of the pattern of quantum correlations on the boundary. This is as close to established fact as theoretical physics gets without direct experimental confirmation. Love produces measurable physical effects that transcend the boundaries of individual brains. This is confirmed by the interbrain synchrony data, the mirror neuron system, the neurochemistry of attachment, the biological merger of microchimerism, and the structural brain changes documented in long-term contemplative practitioners. Love is not merely an emotion. It is a physical process that connects separate biological systems, synchronizes their activity, and creates higher-order integrated systems from previously independent components. The contemplative traditions, across every major civilization, describe love as the fundamental structure of reality and the spiritual path as a gravitational process of attraction toward unity. This is confirmed by the convergence of descriptions across Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, and multiple other traditions that had no contact with each other and that arrived at structurally identical conclusions through entirely different methods. Here is what the evidence suggests but has not proven. The evidence suggests that the interbrain synchrony observed between closely connected people may be mediated, in part, by quantum entanglement between neural systems. The synchrony persists in conditions that rule out known classical coupling mechanisms, and its characteristics distance independence, frequency specificity in the gamma band, correlation with emotional depth rather than physical proximity are consistent with quantum entanglement. But the direct measurement of quantum entanglement between macroscopic neural systems has not been performed, and the technical barriers to performing it are formidable. The evidence suggests that the contemplative practices that deepen the experience of love work by reducing internal decoherence, thereby enhancing the brain's sensitivity to the quantum entanglement that connects it to other systems. The neuroimaging data is consistent with this interpretation. Meditation reduces default mode network activity, enhances gamma coherence, increases interbrain synchrony, and produces structural changes in regions associated with empathy and integration. But the specific quantum mechanism, the link between reduced neural noise and enhanced quantum coherence, has not been directly demonstrated. And the evidence suggests but does not prove that gravity and love are two expressions of the same underlying principle: the tendency of entangled systems toward maximum correlation, maximum integration, and maximum connection. Gravity expresses this tendency geometrically as the curvature of space-time. Love expresses this tendency experientially as the attraction between conscious beings. Both arise from entanglement. Both produce attraction. Both draw separate systems toward unity, and both are emergent. Neither gravity nor love is fundamental in the way that entanglement itself is fundamental. This is the hypothesis. It is not proven. It may never be proven in the strict experimental sense, but it is consistent with everything that physics has established, everything that neuroscience has measured, and everything that the contemplative traditions have described. And its implications, if it is even approximately correct, are extraordinary. Let us explore those implications. The first and most immediate implication concerns the nature of the universe itself. The standard scientific narrative describes the universe as a vast, cold, fundamentally purposeless expanse of space in which matter and energy interact according to impersonal laws, and in which the emergence of life, consciousness, and love is an accident, a spectacularly unlikely but ultimately meaningless consequence of random processes operating over immense stretches of time. In this narrative, love is an evolutionary adaptation. It exists because organisms that bonded with their mates and their offspring survived and reproduced more successfully than organisms that did not. Love is useful. It is not meaningful. The universe does not love. It merely produces organisms that do. The entanglement framework challenges this narrative at its foundations. If the fundamental structure of the universe is entanglement, and if entanglement is the same thing that conscious beings experience as love, then the universe is not accidentally producing love. The universe is inherently loving in the structural sense that its fundamental tendency is toward connection, correlation, and the drawing together of separate systems into integrated wholes. Love is not an accident of evolution. It is an expression of the deepest tendency of physical reality. Evolution did not invent love. Evolution discovered love, discovered the principle of connection that was built into the fabric of the universe from the first instant, and that has been expressing itself at every scale and in every domain as the gravitational attraction that structures the cosmos, the chemical bonding that structures molecules, the biological symbiosis that structures ecosystems, and the conscious love that structures human life. If gravity and love are both expressions of entanglement, then the universe is not a cold, indifferent mechanism that accidentally produces the experience of love in biological organisms. The universe is a system whose fundamental structure is connection, whose deepest tendency is toward the correlation, the integration, and the mutual involvement of all its components. The curvature that holds galaxies together is the same curvature that holds families together. The attraction that draws planets into orbits is the same attraction that draws friends into conversations. The force that shaped the cosmos from the first instant of the Big Bang is the same force that shapes your heart when you fall in love. The universe is not a machine that produces love as a byproduct. The universe is love, expressing itself as a machine. This is not a New Age platitude. It is a logical consequence of the physics. If gravity is entanglement expressed as geometry, and if love is entanglement expressed as experience, and if entanglement is the fundamental structure of reality, then the fundamental structure of reality is the thing that produces both gravity and love, and the thing that produces both gravity and love is connection. The universe is, at its most fundamental level, a system of connections, and the connections are not neutral, not arbitrary, not random. They are directional. They produce attraction. They draw separate things toward unity. They curve the geometry of space toward the merger of masses and the geometry of consciousness toward the merger of minds. The universe has a direction, and the direction is toward togetherness. Teilhard de Chardin described this direction as the law of complexity consciousness, the observation that the history of the universe displays a consistent trajectory toward increasing complexity and increasing consciousness. From elementary particles to atoms to molecules to cells to organisms to societies to the global noosphere. At every stage, the direction is the same. Separate components come together, form higher-order systems, and the higher-order systems are more complex, more integrated, and more conscious than their components. The trajectory is not random, it is directional. And the direction is toward unity, toward the omega point that lies at the end of the trajectory, the state of maximum complexity and maximum consciousness toward which the entire cosmos is being drawn. This trajectory is not an interpretation imposed on the data by a theologically motivated observer. It is visible in the data itself. The universe at the Big Bang was a nearly uniform soup of elementary particles. 14 billion years later, it contains galaxies, stars, planets, oceans, rainforests, neural networks, and conscious beings who are reading these words and wondering about the meaning of it all. The increase in complexity is not merely incremental, it is exponential, and the direction has never reversed. There has never been a period in the history of the universe in which the maximum complexity of existing structures decreased. The arrow of complexity points in one direction only, forward, toward greater integration, greater connection, greater mutual involvement of the components of the universe with each other. The physicist Paul Davies has argued that the existence of this arrow of complexity requires explanation. The second law of thermodynamics predicts increasing disorder, not increasing order. And yet the universe produces order not everywhere, not always, but reliably, persistently, and with increasing sophistication. The order is local, not global. It is created in specific regions at the expense of increased disorder elsewhere. But the fact that the universe consistently produces local order of increasing complexity against the thermodynamic gradient suggests that there is a principle at work that the second law alone does not capture. Teilhard called this principle love. The physics may call it the entanglement, drive the tendency of quantum systems toward maximum correlation that produces both gravitational attraction and conscious connection. In the entanglement framework, Teilhard's law of complexity consciousness is a description of the second law of thermodynamics applied to entanglement. Systems evolve toward maximum entanglement entropy, toward the state of greatest correlation, greatest integration, greatest mutual involvement. This is the thermodynamic drive that Verlinde identified as the source of gravity. And it is the same drive that produces the increasing complexity of the universe, because complexity is what maximum entanglement looks like when it organizes itself into a spatial geometry. The universe is not accidentally becoming more complex. It is being driven toward complexity by the same thermodynamic tendency that produces gravity. Complexity and gravity are both expressions of the universe's tendency toward maximum entanglement. And love, the conscious experience of this tendency, is the universe becoming aware of its own deepest drive. The Buddhist tradition describes this drive with the concept of bodhicitta, the awakening mind, the spontaneous aspiration toward the liberation of all sentient beings that arises when the perception of interdependence becomes sufficiently clear. Bodhicitta is not a moral ideal imposed from outside. It is the natural direction of consciousness when the obstructions of ego and ignorance are removed. It is the geodesic of the awakened mind, the path that consciousness naturally follows through the curved landscape of interconnection when nothing prevents it from following its natural trajectory. Just as a stone naturally falls toward the center of the earth when nothing supports it, consciousness naturally moves toward universal compassion when nothing obstructs it. The gravitational pull and the compassionate pull are the same pull, experienced in different domains. The Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh described bodhicitta with an image that directly parallels the physics. When you look at a tree, if you see the tree as a mere tree, you have not really seen the tree. When you can see that the tree is not just a tree, that the tree is the cloud, the rain, the soil, the minerals, the sunshine, and the entire cosmos, then you truly see the tree. This seeing, this perception of the total entanglement that connects the tree to everything in the universe is, Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, the source of love. You do not love the tree because you decide to. You love the tree because you really see it, as a node in the infinite web of entanglement that constitutes reality. The love is the natural, spontaneous, gravitational response to the perception of connection. Remove the perception, and the love disappears. Restore the perception, and the love returns. Love is not generated by the will. Love is revealed by seeing, and seeing is the reduction of the decoherence that conceals the entanglement that was always there. The Christian tradition describes this drive with the concept of the divine processions, the movement of the Trinity within itself, from Father to Son to Spirit, a movement that is not temporal but eternal, not sequential but simultaneous, not mechanical but loving. The Father generates the Son through an act of knowing. The Father and the Son generate the Spirit through an act of loving, and the Spirit returns to the Father, completing the circle of divine self-knowledge and divine self-love that is the inner life of God. This circulation, this perichoretic dance of mutual indwelling is, in the entanglement framework, the circulation of maximum entanglement within a maximally integrated system. The Trinity is the divine system at maximum phi, the system in which every part is fully present in every other part, in which the entanglement is complete and the separation is zero. And the creation of the universe is the extension of this internal circulation outward, the overflow of the divine entanglement into the created order, producing the gravitational curvature that holds the cosmos together and the experiential attraction that draws conscious beings toward each other and toward God. Augustine described the Trinity as lover, beloved, and the love between them. The Father is the lover, the Son is the beloved, and the Holy Spirit is the love that flows between them, the dynamic, living, self-sustaining force of attraction that constitutes the inner life of God. In the entanglement framework, the Father is the entangling system, the Son is the entangled system, and the Holy Spirit is the entanglement itself, the quantum correlation that connects them, that produces the curvature that draws them together, and that overflows into the created universe as the gravitational attraction that structures the cosmos and the experiential attraction that structures the heart. Dostoevsky, in The Brothers Karamazov, placed in the mouth of the elder Zosima a statement that bridges the theological and the physical. Love all God's creation, the whole and every grain of sand in it. Love every leaf, every ray of God's light. Love the animals, love the plants, love everything. If you love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in things. Once you perceive it, you will begin to comprehend it better every day, and you will come at last to love the whole world with an all-embracing love. Zosima is describing a practice that begins with love and ends with perception, with seeing the divine mystery in things. This is the reverse of the usual spiritual sequence, in which you first learn the truth and then respond with love. Zosima says, love first, and the truth will become visible. In the entanglement framework, this makes precise, physical sense. Love increases entanglement between the lover and the loved. Increased entanglement reduces the decoherence barrier between them. Reduced decoherence allows the deeper structure of reality, the entanglement, the connection, the divine mystery to become perceptible. You do not need to understand the physics of entanglement to perceive entanglement. You need to love, and the perception will follow. Because love is the act that reduces the decoherence that conceals the entanglement. Love is both the method and the result. The practice and the attainment are one. In Islam, the Hadith Qudsi that has been a recurring presence throughout this series, I was a hidden treasure, and I love to be known, so I created the creation in order to be known, describes the creation of the universe as an act of love. The divine treasure was hidden because it was maximally entangled with itself, undifferentiated, undivided, unseparated, containing all information in a single, unified, maximally correlated state. The creation was the differentiation of this state, the decoherence that produced the multiplicity of apparently separate objects, beings, and consciousnesses that populate the created world. And the love that motivated the creation was the divine tendency towards self-knowledge, the tendency of the maximally entangled state to differentiate itself, to produce observers who could perceive it from within, and to be known by the consciousnesses it produced. The gravitational attraction that draws the creation back toward unity is, in this framework, the same love that produced the creation in the first place. The creation expanded outward through decoherence, through the differentiation that produced the illusion of separation. And gravity draws the creation back inward through entanglement, through the attraction that dissolves the separation and restores the unity. The universe is an outward breath and an inward breath, an expansion of decoherence, followed by a contraction of entanglement, a dispersal of the many, followed by a gathering of the one. And the force that drives both movements is the same force, the divine love that created the universe in order to know itself through the conscious beings it produced. Ibn Arabi captured this with his concept of the breath of the merciful Nafas al-Rahman, the divine exhalation that brings the cosmos into existence, and the divine inhalation that draws it back into unity. The breath is continuous, the universe is being exhaled and inhaled simultaneously at every moment, with the exhalation producing the spatial expansion and the inhalation producing the gravitational contraction. The universe is not static. It is breathing, and the breath is love, the love that creates and the love that draws back, the love that differentiates and the love that reunites, the love that is simultaneously the centrifugal force of creation and the centripetal force of gravity. The modern cosmological observation that the universe is expanding, that galaxies are moving away from each other, that the space between objects is growing, acquires new meaning in this framework. The expansion is the decoherence, the exhalation, the differentiation that produces the multiplicity of apparently separate objects, and the gravitational attraction that draws galaxies together, that forms clusters and superclusters, that will eventually in some cosmological models reverse the expansion and draw the universe back toward a final singularity, is the re-entanglement, the inhalation, the reunion that restores the original unity. The cosmologist Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology proposes that the end of one cosmic cycle, the heat death, the state of maximum entropy and maximum expansion, is geometrically identical to the beginning of the next cycle, the Big Bang, the state of minimum entropy and maximum concentration. The universe dies and is reborn endlessly in a cycle that has no beginning and no end. If this model is correct, then the cosmic breath that Ibn Arabi describes is not a metaphor. It is the physical structure of cosmological time, an endless alternation of expansion and contraction, differentiation and reunification, exhalation and inhalation, the breathing of a universe that is, at the deepest level, alive with the same love that created it. In Hinduism, the concept of Leela, divine play, describes the universe as the joyful self-expression of Brahman, who creates the world not out of necessity, but out of creative delight. The creation is a dance, an improvisation, a play of consciousness with itself. And the gravitational attraction that structures the cosmos is the choreography of the dance, the pattern of movements by which the dancers are drawn together and separated and drawn together again, in an endless rhythm of union and differentiation that is sustained by the same energy. The joy of the dance, the delight of the play, the love that finds its expression in the creative interaction of the many with the one. Krishna's Lila is often misunderstood as suggesting that the universe is not serious, that it is a game, a diversion, a pastime for a bored deity. But the Sanskrit concept of Lila carries a meaning that the English word play does not fully capture. Lila is creative expression, the spontaneous, joyful, unconstrained outpouring of creative energy that is the nature of Brahman. It is what happens when infinite consciousness expresses itself without limitation. The universe is not created as a means to an end. It is created as an end in itself, as the self-expression of a creative love that has no purpose beyond the joy of creating. And the gravitational curvature that structures the universe is the choreography of this creative expression, the pattern by which the dancers are drawn together and separated and drawn together again in the endless dance of the Sina, divine play. The physicist Richard Feynman, who was not known for mystical inclinations, described his experience of physics in terms that echo Lila. The pleasure of finding things out is the most beautiful experience there is. The pleasure of finding things out is the pleasure of perceiving connections. The pleasure of seeing that two things you thought were different are actually the same. That a pattern you did not see is actually there. That the universe is more connected, more integrated, and more beautiful than you had realized. This pleasure is the conscious experience of entanglement becoming visible. It is the joy of the universe perceiving its own structure through the consciousness of a physicist who has reduced enough decoherence to see what was always there. Feynman's pleasure and Krishna's Lila are the same experience, the delight of connection becoming conscious of itself. In Buddhism, the Avatamsaka Sutra describes a universe in which every atom contains every other atom, every moment contains every other moment, and every being contains every other being. This is Indra's net applied to the totality of existence, a universe of total entanglement, total interconnection, total mutual involvement, in which the separation between any two things is an illusion maintained by the limited perspective of the observer. The sutra describes the Bodhisattva's perception of this total interconnection as an experience of overwhelming love, a love so vast and so complete that it encompasses every being, in every world, in every time, without exception and without preference. This love is not a sentiment. It is a perception, the perception of the entanglement, structure of reality in its totality, and the gravitational curvature that holds the Avatamsaka's universe together is the geometric expression of this same total entanglement, experienced not as love, but as the physical attraction that draws every atom toward every other atom. We must now address the deepest objection to this entire investigation. The objection is simple and powerful. Correlation is not causation. The fact that gravity and love share structural parallels does not mean they are the same thing. Parallel structures can arise from different causes, and the leap from gravity and love are both connected to entanglement. Gravity and love are two expressions of the same principle. Requires a step that the evidence does not compel. This objection is valid. The synthesis we have presented is a hypothesis, not a conclusion. The structural parallels are suggestive, not proof. And the connection to entanglement is established for gravity through rigorous mathematical physics, but only suggested for love through neuroscience that is consistent with but does not confirm the quantum mechanism. But there is a response to this objection that is worth considering. In the history of physics, structural parallels between apparently different phenomena have almost always turned out to reflect a deeper identity. The parallel between electricity and magnetism reflected the deeper identity of electromagnetism. The parallel between mass and energy reflected the deeper identity of mass energy. The parallel between space and time reflected the deeper identity of space-time. In every case, the parallel was noticed first, the identity was proposed second, and the confirmation came third. We are currently at the second stage. The parallel between gravity and love has been noticed. The identity has been proposed. The confirmation, if it comes, will come from the ongoing development of quantum gravity, quantum consciousness research, and the neuroscience of contemplative practice. The history of physics teaches us that the deepest truths are often the most counterintuitive. The Earth orbiting the Sun seemed absurd to people who could see the Sun moving across the sky. The relativity of time seemed absurd to people who could feel time flowing in one direction. The entanglement of particles across distance seemed absurd to Einstein himself. In each case, the counterintuitive truth was confirmed because it was mathematically necessary and experimentally verifiable. The proposal that gravity and love are two expressions of the same principle is counterintuitive, but so was every previous unification in the history of physics. And the mathematical evidence, the emergence of gravity from entanglement, the neuroscience of love as integration, the contemplative phenomenology of love as unity, points in the same direction as the counterintuitive proposal. And there is one more consideration that weighs in favor of the hypothesis. The contemplative traditions have been conducting an independent investigation of the nature of reality for millennia. Their methods are different from the methods of physics. Their instruments are different, their languages are different, but their conclusions are remarkably consistent. The fundamental nature of reality is love, not metaphorical love, not sentimental love, structural love, the force of attraction that draws all things toward unity, that dissolves the boundaries between separate entities, and that constitutes the ground from which all of reality emerges. When two entirely independent investigations, one using the instruments of physics and the other using the instruments of contemplative practice, arrive at the same conclusion from entirely different starting points, the convergence deserves serious attention. It does not constitute proof, but it constitutes evidence, the kind of evidence that should motivate further investigation rather than premature dismissal. The experiment that would test this hypothesis most directly would measure the quantum entanglement between two brains during the experience of deep love using quantum sensors capable of detecting non-local correlations in neural tissue, compared between closely bonded pairs and stranger pairs, under conditions that rule out classical coupling. The technology does not currently exist, but it is approaching. The development of quantum magnetometers, quantum diamond sensors, and next-generation squid arrays is producing instruments of increasing sensitivity to quantum effects in biological tissue. Within a decade, the experiment may be feasible, and its result, whichever way it goes, will be one of the most important results in the history of science. If quantum entanglement is detected between loving brains and not between stranger brains, the hypothesis will receive its first direct empirical support. If it is not detected, the hypothesis will need to be revised or abandoned. Until then, the convergence stands as it is. Remarkable, suggestive, consistent across physics, neuroscience, and the contemplative traditions, and worthy of the most serious attention that science and philosophy can provide. So what does all of this mean for you? It means that the love you feel is not a trivial chemical accident in a meaningless universe. It is a perception of the deepest structure of reality. The pull you feel toward the people you love the beauty that moves you, the truth that draws you forward. These are not evolutionary tricks designed to promote reproduction. They are the conscious experience of the same curvature that holds the cosmos together. You are not merely feeling love. You are feeling gravity, the gravity of consciousness, the curvature of the conscious landscape toward connection, the geodesic of the awakened heart. It means that the practices of the contemplative traditions are not merely psychological techniques for managing stress or cultivating pleasant emotions. They are interventions in the entanglement structure of reality. When you meditate, you are reducing the decoherence that maintains the illusion of separation. When you pray, you are aligning your consciousness with the curvature that holds the universe together. When you love, you are participating in the fundamental force that structures the cosmos. These are not metaphors, they are descriptions of what the physics, the neuroscience, and the contemplative traditions converge upon when they are examined with sufficient depth and sufficient honesty. It means that every genuine act of love you perform, every moment of compassion, every gesture of kindness, every instance of truly seeing another person in their full depth and responding with care is not merely a social nicety. It is a contribution to the entanglement structure of the universe. You are, in the most literal sense available to physics, increasing the curvature of the conscious landscape, deepening the gravitational well of love that draws other consciousnesses toward connection. Your love does not evaporate when the moment passes. It is encoded in the entanglement correlations between your consciousness and the consciousness of the person you loved. It is preserved by unitarity. It is permanent, and it contributes, however slightly, to the total curvature of a universe that is shaped, at every level, by the entanglement its conscious inhabitants create. The Buddhist concept of merit transfer the idea that the spiritual benefits of practice can be shared with all sentient beings, acquires a physical interpretation in this framework. If your practice reduces your internal decoherence and enhances your entanglement with the surrounding reality, then the enhanced entanglement does not stop at the boundary of your body. It propagates outward through the entanglement network, affecting systems that are connected to you through the quantum correlations of the vacuum. Your practice benefits all beings not through a mystical mechanism, but through the physical propagation of enhanced coherence through the entanglement network of the universe. And it means that the universe is not indifferent to you. The universe is curved toward you. The same entanglement that produces the gravitational attraction between galaxies produces the attraction that draws you toward the people you love, the truth you seek, and the beauty you find in the world. You are not an accident in an uncaring cosmos. You are a node in the entanglement network of the universe, a point at which the universal connection becomes conscious of itself, a locus of awareness in which the cosmic love that structures all of reality becomes experiential, becomes personal, becomes the specific, irreplaceable, infinitely valuable experience of being you, loving what you love, and being drawn toward what draws you. Dante was right. The love that moves the sun and the other stars is the same love that moves your heart. The curvature is one curvature. The attraction is one attraction. The force is one force. And the whisper you sometimes hear, the quiet, persistent, inarticulate sense that everything is connected, that you are held by something you cannot see, that there is a force beneath the surface of things that draws everything toward everything else. That whisper is not your imagination. It is gravity, speaking in the language of consciousness, telling you what it has always been telling the stars. Come home. The distance between you and everything you have ever loved was never the distance it appeared to be. The space that seems to separate you from the world is an emergent property of the decoherent surface. Beneath the surface, the entanglement is unbroken. The connection is permanent. And the love that you feel, the love that is pulling you right now, in this moment, towards something you cannot name but cannot ignore, is the same force that lit the first stars, that curved the first space-time, that drew the first atoms together into the first molecules that would eventually become the first cells, that would eventually become the first brains, that would eventually become the first consciousness that would eventually look up at the sky and feel, for the first time, the pull of something vast and beautiful and impossibly close. That pull has never stopped. It has been operating since the first instant of the universe. It will operate until the last. And it is operating now, in you, as you, through the simple, sacred, cosmologically consequential act of being conscious and allowing yourself to love. Gravity whispers, love answers. And they have been having the same conversation since the beginning of time.